Hello and welcome back to the Drop Step podcast. I am joined by good friend of the show, Esfandiar Baraheni. Making time for the show despite being one of the busiest men in NBA analysis, in the NBA analysis sphere. I always appreciate it when you come on. I'm always worried to DM, like maybe this is the time where he just goes, Jack, I'm swamped, but you always make time for the drop step. So I really do appreciate it. How are you
Man,
doing, dude?
I'm good. I appreciate it. And thank you for being patient with me because I know I kind of left you hanging for a couple of days. It was a busy time, no doubt. But yes, appreciate you having me on as always. It's great to talk basketball with you.
Mm.
And ready to talk about these Toronto Raptors.
Yeah, I was sat there like, what the hell is this guy doing? It's like he's covering the finals for a national media outlet. How dare he leave me on red for 48 hours? Yeah, no bad blood here. We're going for like a popcorn episode. I feel like sometimes we like to get nerdy, sometimes we like to go a little bit more box office.
Sure.
And this is what I would describe as like your popcorn Mission Impossible style podcast where we're just trying to
Yeah.
put bums in seats
We're
and
doing
entertain
stunts.
people.
Yes.
Because yeah, we're going big fish hunting.
Yeah.
We're out on the boat with Masai, and we're going to talk through potential star trades for the
Mhm.
Toronto Raptors. Um, and we're not necessarily saying that like all of these are feasible, probable, possible. It's just a case of evaluating where the roster is at, what it would take to get these certain players, and whether sort of those moves are worth it, or whether the Raptors should stand pat and wait for the next big fish to enter the pond. But I suggest there is no bigger fish than Giannis Antetokounmpo to talk about. This guy's setting records if you're reeling him in.
Yeah.
This would
Yeah.
easily be the biggest move in franchise history. Felt like there was a lot of buzz about 14 days ago where those terrible betting odds, trade betting odds posts were coming up. It's like, if you're betting on a player's next team,
Yeah.
please seek help, find something else.
Yes.
I think they must have the lowest hit rate. First of all, what was it like when you sort of saw, oh wow, this might be real? Did you allow yourself to start hoping, or was there a healthy degree of skepticism?
There's always a healthy degree of skepticism because as I've covered the Toronto Raptors for the last I don't know 3 or 4 seasons, 5 seasons if you will, but
Mm.
championship run onwards.
Hmm.
As I've covered this team since then, they have constantly been in these type of conversations. It was Giannis in the bubble in 2020
Hmm.
and 2021. It was KD after that. They got involved in the Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes. They got involved in the Damian Lillard sweepstakes, Kevin
Mm.
Durant again, and then now Kevin Durant again, apparently for the third time. We'll probably get to that in a second. And now Giannis.
Yes.
And so I'm skeptical all the time, but at the same time, it's the Godfather 3 type of thing. It's like just when I
Mm.
thought I was out, they pulled me back in. And that's how I feel when it comes to these trade rumors, especially when it comes to a guy the caliber of Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, talk about franchise changing, even at his
Mhm.
age. He's still, I believe he's 29 or 30 at this point, might be 30 going on 31. But a guy who has consistently been in the MVP conversation since about 2018 or 2019. That is the type of player you're acquiring. A guy who, in my opinion, still has a lot of basketball left in him. And so you think of the feasibility of this. I do think the
Mm.
Raptors would be able to get into the conversation, even
Mhm.
though there will be other teams that could offer up more. You think of the Houston Rockets and what they could offer up, whether it be a Shingun plus MN Thompson package or something along the lines of that with those
Mm.
highly enticing Suns picks. You think of, I mean, honestly, people will bring up the Oklahoma City Thunder. I don't think they would be interested in doing that because they're
Mhm.
already a championship worthy team. Maybe they would. Who knows? You never know the mind of Sam Presti, but they obviously are another team that could offer a ton. The San Antonio Spurs with the second overall pick plus a bunch of young players can definitely get in the conversation. But and I'm curious to think what your thoughts about this. But if Scotty Barnes is on the table for
Mm.
this type of trade, I would think that he's the best asset available. Other than maybe you could argue the second overall pick, I think that would probably trump that. I don't know. At least maybe that's my Raptors cap, but I'm curious to see where you think on that.
Do you know the difficult thing? I feel like we put so much into the unknown, and the
Mhm.
fact that Amen Thompson seems to be on this crazy trajectory, I
Absolutely.
think
Yeah.
we almost fill in the blanks a little bit where we say, oh, well, he's made first team all defense this year. He's playing for a 50-win team. This guy's an all NBA level player. He's not quite yet. There are
Right.
still holes in the game to fill. I personally think that if every single thing was to just hit the trade market tomorrow on its own, forget what you're trading for, I think Amen might probably bring back the most.
That's fair. Yeah.
But it's close because you got to consider the max contract for Scotty. I think you've still got 2 cheap years left of Thompson.
Yeah.
And then it completely depends on your evaluation of Dylan Harper. Some people are viewing him as like a franchise changing guy. If you're like in the real nerdy spaces of draft Twitter, there's been a
Yeah.
healthy
There's
degree
some
of
skepticism.
skepticism.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like, oh, he's a wing closeout guy. Let's see when he
Right.
actually gets in the league. Let's see when he's not playing at Rutgers. So I think Scotty is right there. It's probably going to depend what GM you ask. Doesn't help that he's come off like a slightly down year considering that trajectory from
For sure.
that first Darko Rajakovic season. So it's close, but it's definitely an asset that gets you in the conversation. I'm quite confident in saying the Bucks are not getting on the phone unless Scotty is sort of at the forefront of that trade package, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree there. And from the Raptors perspective, you kind of have a conversation in two folds. The first thing is, would you be willing to part with Scotty Barnes? At least from my perspective, I think I would be. I think the value makes a ton of sense. And by including Scotty, I would expect that you're not necessarily including a ton more. You're probably involving picks of some sorts. You're maybe involving the 9th pick. You're maybe adding an extra prospect or something along the lines of that. But you're not adding too much more in terms of like crazy value on top of Scotty. Maybe there is. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the thing is. But the assumption would be you're probably going Scotty plus a couple of picks versus, you're doing the 4 or 5 pick deals that people kind of think of when you think of a Giannis type trade,
Yeah, we're not trading for Desmond Bain here. All the picks don't have to be involved, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff will be left in the cupboard. It just depends. I think it's fair to say it seems as though Giannis might be staying a buck this offseason. That
Yeah.
chat seemed to
Yeah.
reach a fever pitch a week or two ago. It's kind of quietened down. There was reporting on Game Theory the other day that it doesn't seem as though a decision has been made yet. It seems like the Kevin Durant sweepstakes are going to be sorted pre-drafted, but then we've got a long old runway into the 25-26 season.
What I would wager, honestly,
Yeah.
is that Giannis's camp is probably waiting to see what the Bucks do in free agency and in the draft and by trading and whatnot. And I would imagine if things start to pick up again, it'll probably be like August, where and this sort of bleeds into the Kevin Durant conversation, like would you trade what you need to trade to acquire Kevin Durant right now versus waiting a couple months for the chance of acquiring Giannis? That's more of a philosophical question of taking the opportunity when you can. To the point about Giannis, I would include whatever is required to trade for a guy like Giannis. I think the Raptors can be competitive post trading for Giannis too. I think between Ingram and Quickly and Jakob Poeltl, there's depth there, right?
That's the really important point. I feel like people have looked and gone, oh, Toronto wouldn't have enough to be a championship team. Like the floor that Giannis has got the Bucks to,
Exactly.
especially when like Dame has been out through the season, they still play at a 50+ win pace. And it's, hey, you're playing with AJ Green, an aging Brook Lopez, Kevin Porter Jr. It's not, guys that have been in sort of all-star conversations, or in Brandon Ingram's case, have been an all-star in the past. So I 100% think that in this Eastern Conference, they would be an absolute bear, and the transformation could be sort of Celtics 2008-esque, because that acquisition is such of such a magnitude, basically. I would wait. I think you have to wait, particularly because of the age profile, but I think this is a nice time to move us on to Kevin Durant. I'm happy to say, I think every other star we're going to talk about today, you're probably not getting Scotty Barnes involved, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So KD, I don't get the KD link. I get that we want a big fish, but it feels like we just, we're at the club. It's 2 a.m.
Exactly.
We're sort of scouting round, right? He's on the table. he might come to Toronto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. This is such a tricky one.
Yeah, I am not. I'm with you. I'm right there with you in the sense that I just don't see the vision. It all honestly depends on price, but it seems
Mm,
like the Suns aren't willing to budge on the things that they've been offered already from the teams that are interested in the Miamis and Houstons and San Antonios and Minnesotas of the world. And so I'm not sure overpaying to acquire a 37-year-old to do a 1 year type of thing, not knowing his commitment post next year. And the
mm,
age is certainly a factor. And are you a contender afterwards? And I don't necessarily see the vision here. I also like just salary matching wise, you're likely going to have to trade two of Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, or Jakob Pertl. And to
hmm
me, that leaves holes somewhere. You're
A
either
massive hole.
right. You either don't have a center or you don't have a ball handler. And so to me, that's kind of like, where are we going here? Are you just going to be the Suns 2.0 with Scotty Barnes, Kevin Durant, and Brandon Ingram? That doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, that's where I it leaves a lot to be desired.
100%. There are positional issues where it's like, right, Brandon Ingram's the shooting guard. I feel like the Raptors, perhaps unless Jamal Shed was in the game, lacked a real presence at the point of attack last year.
Yeah.
And that trade is leaving you no room to bring someone in unless it's like, Shed, you're ready. You're going to play our point guard, and we're going to get all of our creation
Right.
from
Exactly.
this big wing trio. So I don't quite see it. It feels a little bit like a leverage play from the Durant camp, maybe, or they're putting these reports out, the Suns, that hey, we've got a good package available. You better stump up, Houston, if
Right.
you want our guy. Give us our picks back, basically. So it's a confusing one. I don't want to spend too much time on KD because I think even if you were to get him for some sort of knockdown price where you're sign and trading Chris Boucher to make the money work and it's RJ Barrett and it's just throwing everything in the cupboard that isn't a main piece,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't see a title team there. So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem
Yeah.
to make sense with his age, right?
No, I agree. Yeah, I'm with you there. I also I would be pretty surprised if the Raptors end up being the team that acquires KD at this point. With the amount of stuff reported about
Yeah.
the four other teams involved, I would be pretty surprised if the Raptors end up with KD.
So we're going to move on, and I'm going to go dealer's choice.
Okay.
Who do you want to talk about? I sent you a nice list of players. What
Yes,
player excites you the most here? That's
man.
essentially here.
So you mentioned Desmond Bain, and I
I
think
knew
this
you'd go
is
this way.
I think this is a similar conversation to this
Yeah.
player, and that's Trey Murphy the third.
hmm
I think it gets to the point where, like, obviously, I don't think the Pelicans are entertaining the idea of trading him. So you would probably have to pay over the top to acquire a player like Trey Murphy, in the sense that it's
Mm,
probably honestly like the 4 picks and 1 pick swap, and maybe salary or
hmm
attaching a contract like a KCP to be able to move off of him and acquire Trey Murphy. I'm all in on that, dude. I think that would be 100% worth it. He's the type of player. Him and Scotty Barnes are friends. I saw them in summer league together. They were walking
mm.
around, hanging around with a group, and like those two would be perfect for each other on the floor. I think Trey has all-star potential and all-star upside.
Yep.
He already knows how to play with Brandon Ingram. I think it's a match made in heaven, to be honest with you. He's the
Mm,
exact type of player that they're hoping, they can get eventually. Trey is bigger, to be fair. He's like 6'10, or 6'9,
yeah.
right? But like he's the exact type of player they're hoping to get from, like, I guess the same type of usage they're trying to get from Grady Dick and from Jacoby Walter eventually, even those guys are a little bit smaller and less athletic. But yeah, count me in,
It's
man.
weird.
Whatever's
It's
required.
it's almost like Toronto would be doing some sort of Project 6 9 thing. They
Oh, there
traded
you
for
go.
Trey.
Look at that. Yeah.
Ever engaged in anything like that before? Who knows? But I think not only are there like massive on-court benefits when you look at Scotty, you look at Brandon, and you say, let's
Mhm.
give these guys space to play. It's not like Jakob Pertl was a Chet, Vic, Miles Turner type spacer from three.
Yeah.
So you have to find a place to basically stuff that spacing in. And if you were to put the stuff spacing in, Trey really, really is probably the premium wing player that you can acquire on the market, because not only is he comfortable shooting at a really high volume, he's comfortable spacing out to the logo, essentially. So
Yeah.
he would be an absolute assassin for the Raptors and really benefit from all the supplementary playmaking on the court. The second thing is the age profile works. And the third thing is you set yourself up Orlando Magic style to have your ducks in a row contract wise, where Trey has 4 years left. Scotty is going into a 5-year extension. Brandon Ingram has 3 years. Emmanuel quickly has 4 years. If I were the Raptors, I would basically be saying, unless you really, really value Jakob and that can sort of like help take a pick off the table, can we do RJ Barrett and then not name your price with picks, but we're willing to go into Desmond Bane conversations here.
Yeah, and like I think the fact that the Raptors have the 9th pick here is sort of enticing for the Pelicans, who have been reported to want to move up. You know, so now you have the 7th and the 9th pick to offer the Philadelphia 76ers or the Charlotte Hornets to go out and try to get a VJ Edgecombe or an Ace Bailey or whoever you're interested in. Maybe you call the Spurs and say, hey, we've got Herb Jones, the 7th and the 9th pick. Would you want to do Dylan Harper for that? And I don't know if they would do that. But, you know, you just call them and see if they're interested. And so from the Pelicans perspective, getting that 9th pick is big. They start their rebuild that way. And you get a cachet of picks included in that. You probably have to go the Desmond Bane route and add multiple unprotected picks and a pick swap and whatnot to get it done. But I honestly think it's worth it. Trey, especially last year, had shown development with the Pelicans of, you know, putting the ball on the floor more often, creating for himself, especially in the pick and roll. And like you said, off ball, he's already an assassin. So yeah, count me in for Trey Murphy. That would be awesome.
If I asked you, just forget about the players that we're going to talk about today, if you could add a profile of player to this Raptors roster to really get things going, would it be that big wing or would you be looking for something else potentially?
Yeah, it's either that big wing or another class of player that I'm sure we're going to talk about, which is lead ball handler / guard. I think those are the two types of players that would really elevate what this group is with Scotty and BI. And, you know, I kind of like Jakob in that group because of the way Darko Rajakovic likes to utilize Jakob as this, you know, ball handling like hub at the top of the post, etc. So I'm in on Jakob, although I do think you could talk me into like a vertical threat type, like a Derek Lively, as a guy who can be a vertical spacer next to Scotty Barnes. That, in my opinion, you can maybe try to find in the draft. But yeah, count me in on like the wing type. I need something to fill my OG Anunoby void. You know, that's what I'm looking for. And I need something to fill the Kyle Lowry void in my heart as well. Those are the two kind of types of players that I'm searching for now to fill out this roster, if that makes sense.
I just want everything to be like the good old days when we used to win 50 games a season. We used to make deep playoff runs and we used to love every single player on the team. We have our DeMar DeRozan. We have our like young franchise guy. Scotty it's just time to get the new band back together, really. You spoke about lead ball handlers. We've spoken about Desmond Bane. This is the name that I'm going to suggest to you that I think I've got the least idea of where you're going to go on this one, and that's Ja Morant, because there's been talk of the Grizzlies potentially looking to blow it all the way up. I personally think that they'll probably look to sort of retool around Ja, particularly with the new CBA. It didn't make sense for Memphis to do some sort of Hail Mary all-in trade. But I think we've seen, particularly with the flattened lottery odds, it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense to tear the whole thing down to shreds because you don't always get that lottery luck. You can get stuck in a Jazz situation where you're sort of fighting for premium talent again. And Memphis has premium talent, but let's say they're sick and tired of the Ja Morant business, can't stay on the court for one reason or another, potentially led to a coaching change at some stage this year because they were interested in this really, really sort of forward-thinking space and offense with a lot of cutting, not so much pick and roll. Ja taking his talents to Toronto. This is, like I said, this is the one that I can't read, and it's one that has a ton of pros and a ton of cons. Where would you feel about Ja Morant? How do you feel about him?
I'd probably say depends on the price, and that's where it ends up being a tricky situation because I think it would take a little bit for the Grizzlies to decide that they want to tear it down and go into a new direction, especially considering the fact that, like, you know, he is the cornerstone of that franchise for all what Jaren Jackson Jr. has done, especially this season, this past season of him being able to like develop as more of an on-ball creator. I think Ja is who sells tickets and gets jersey sales and whatnot. Like, he is the franchise in that regard. So I would be surprised if they were to move off of him when he's at his lowest point. That being said, if they are willing to move off of him, then yes,
Yeah.
count me in. You know, if all it takes is like quickly in the 9th pick or something along the lines of that, then yeah, you know what? Yes, I'm down. Lock it in. Let's do it. No problem. Yeah.
But if I presented you 2 deals on the table, one of them is RJ Barrett plus picks for Trey
Mhm.
Murphy. One of them is Emmanuel Quickly plus picks for Ja Morant. What would you pursue if sort of the pick capital was equal?
This is wild. I would probably go with Trey. Yeah.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. Fair
Yeah.
enough. I mean,
Yeah.
like you're saying about Memphis not wanting to sell at their lowest on Ja Morant. I think there's an argument to be had about Emmanuel Quickly as well, having had an injury-riddled season,
Absolutely.
that it might be a little bit quick to get off that return that you had from the OG trade. So
Yeah.
it's a tough one. What do you think about like the spacing concerns with someone that's not a lights out shooter coming into play with Scotty, with Brandon, with Jakob?
Yeah. It's valid. It absolutely is valid. And that presents its own issues. You hope that the ancillary players like the Grady Dix and Jacoby Walters of the world,
Mhm.
are able to alleviate some of that pressure. You hope that Brandon Ingram off of the catch can increase his frequency. You know, that's been a conversation a lot with BI. But I think one thing that's very desperately needed on this Raptors team is also rim pressure.
Mhm.
And applying pressure on the rim and getting good looks offensively because of it. And Ja is one of the best at applying pressure at the rim. So that to me it can work offensively, but you need to be a little bit creative in the way that you use some of these secondary players around Ja.
I think you've spoken about this at length with Emmanuel Quickly, and that being the sort of next step in his game, having the
For sure.
confidence to take the ball deep into the paint and maintain that dribble. To me, Jar might be the most aggressive interior guard passer that we have in the league. Sort of some of the angles, some of the stuff that he tries when he gets there.
Yeah.
There's sort of been criticism of like he just throws himself at the rim, and it's not going to work in this slightly more physical NBA that we've seen in the last sort of season and a half. But that would be a real sort of addition of something that has been sorely lacking, because even though Scotty is big, even though this offense manufactures like a high quality of shots, and Samson's got on about that on the Raptors Republic podcast, the Pull Up Trade podcast, it's still we do need a guy that can go out there and get his own, and we need a guy that can go out there and manufacture rim attempts, whether that's for him or other players.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe BI can do that more in this offensive system than when he was paired with Zion, who was also kind of crowding the middle a little bit. That's sort of the hope, or I guess the promise. We'll see if that ends up panning out. But when you can get a guard who can apply pressure on the rim like Ja, I think you have to consider it, especially where the Raptors are. And honestly, they haven't had a player to apply pressure on the rim. Even Fred VanVleet was not a guy who put pressure on the rim. Kyle was, but especially at his old age, got to the point where he wasn't that often getting to the rim. Yeah, you need a guy. You need a ball handler who can get into the teeth of that defense and create plays for you. So Ja fits that build for sure.
Can we quickly sidebar? I am so ludicrously high on Brandon Ingram as a playmaker.
I love it.
12 months ago, was having, really quite demonic thoughts about this guy's ceiling as just a pick and roll sort of samurai, essentially. Because if you look at the quality, and this is no disrespect to, I would say Steven Adams is like the standout guy, Jonas Valanciunas. If you look at the quality of pick and roll big he's been partnered with through his career,
Yeah.
it's never been someone with a ton of sort of gravitational pull. And I think that Jakob could be a really fun fit. I think that if you were to go out there and get Carmen in the draft and potentially look to move off of Jakob,
Yeah.
finally give Brandon Ingram that
Yeah.
vertical spacer,
Yeah.
he would cook, man.
Yeah.
And then you're really looking at what a great value trade could be when you see like it's just one pick going out for this guy that is one of the better wing passes in the league. It just feels like everyone's forgotten about that because he likes to pull up from the mid range.
Yeah, it is funny that doesn't get mentioned often, because if you go and look at like synergy, he is one of the most frequent wing pick and roll ball handlers in the league. I think over the last like 4 or 5 seasons in New Orleans, he's had like over 350 pick and roll ball handling possessions. So he loves to use the pick and roll. He loves to make plays out of the pick and roll. Obviously gets into that patent mid-range shot off of those like snug pick and roll actions that he runs. So yes, he'd work very well with Jakob Poeltl, especially because Jakob can put pressure on defenses in the short roll area with his floater. And I think that just opens up more opportunities. I'm intrigued by the idea of him and Scotty screening for each other, although the players defending them would be similarly positioned and similarly sized. So maybe you don't gain too many advantages. But yeah, I'm intrigued either way. And I agree with you that I think like some of the idea of these guys trading for a Kevin Durant or trading for, kind of being okay with not having that typical point guard type ball handler is knowing that Scotty and BI can handle the ball as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it takes funk to be a really good team in the NBA this year. We so often see like, oh, we're trying to build in the style of this team. And by the time the team actually gets to that vision, it's like the meta has evolved. No one was going double big 2 years ago. And now suddenly any team in the playoffs that's sort of worth their salt has that double big lineup that they can go to. It seems to have sort of reemerged. It feels like you have to acquire talent in whatever way possible and just sort of really roll the dice basically and back your coaching staff to make it work. So Ingram to me really could be the big fish on the roster, where I think that he could be similar to what he was in New Orleans, the high tier 1B to Scotty's 1A, especially when you think about how the usage is going to be split. I think he is a real swing player in the entire Eastern Conference this year, not for the Raptors. But if we're taking it away from Brandon, let's go back to this idea of the big wing spacer and acquiring a 5 outlook and maybe giving up less pick capital than it would take for like a Trey Murphy and acquiring like a Lauri Markkanen.
Yeah.
And the salary is again slightly strange because he's up in sort of the issue, 40s. Right?
Yeah.
But if you could just chuck him on the roster, if you could edit the contract somehow on 2K, you would have a hell of a lot of fun with this guy on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he fits everything that you need from like a stretch 5 look. I think also there's a world in which he's so tall that like you can get away with putting him at the 5 and have Scotty sort of be your de facto 5 defensively, in the sense that maybe you have Lauri as the primary on certain big guys, but you have Scotty as the help. And that length of him and BI could kind of recover out on the help side. Like that makes sense to me. Maybe it's not a top 10 defense, it's maybe not like the most successful defensive scheme ever, but you could get creative in working that on the defensive side of the ball. I'm super intrigued with Lauri. This is a guy the Raptors have actually been interested in the past to try and trade for. I think he fits extremely well. To be fair, that was when Pascal Siakam was on the roster and they were looking for more of a stretch 5 look to provide Siakam with more floor spacing. As you might know, Siakam, a big reason he wanted to go to Indiana was to play with the floor spacing ability of Miles Turner.
Yeah, of course.
So like Lauri kind of fits the bill of that. And I think, his ability to cut without the ball, his ability to move without the ball fits extremely well in Darko Rajakovic's system. I guess it just depends on the price. Like, are you looking at a Desmond? No, you can't be looking at a Desmond Bane type deal. It's probably like 2 picks, right? And something else,
I would maybe even go to 3 picks if I could just fight tooth and nail to keep the 9. Because I think if you look at the trade package required, RJ Barrett and Jakob Poeltl total $47.2 million in outgoing salary. Lauri would be $46.3 million coming back in. So that's nigh on dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
And you essentially say to Utah, fine, have our draft for a couple of years. That's absolutely fine. But we need this 9th pick to give us a chance at a Carmen, a chance at a Derek Queen, at whatever is your, whoever's your big of choice, basically. Maybe you even trade down in the draft and you say, like, fine, we'll send you 9, but you need to send us back 21 because we want to grab a Johan Berenger, we want to grab a Ryan Kalkbrenner. So I'd want to maintain the ability to have a 5 on the court and just go absolutely massive at times. I feel like when I've watched Dallas pre-Luka trade, I've been struck by like the lack of stereotypical point of attack defense and just how effective massive size across the board can be. And there's no reason that Toronto can't do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I would be in on that. I mean, I'm so in on it that I'm kind of like, should I like suggest it online and see what people think? But yes, count me in on Lauri Markkanen because I think again he fits extremely well, sort of in that Trey Murphy role of like big
Yeah.
shooter, big wing. I'm not sure if Utah is willing to part ways with him. If that, especially given the fact that like Utah, I don't know if you saw some of the kind of conversation around them with we're not going to tank anymore and whatnot. I don't know
Come
how
on,
much I
man.
believe in
Come
that,
on.
but
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see. But yeah,
So
look, everything has a price. It seems now in the NBA. We just saw the Lakers sell for $10 billion. So who knows with Lauri Markkanen?
the talk with Utah today is that they're trying to move up from 5 to 3.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the discussion from the Philadelphia side is, will you take Paul George for us?
Yeah.
And I
Right.
can very clearly see Austin Ainge saying, see, we're not trying to tank. We've just acquired an all NBA level talent in Paul
Yeah.
George and moved up in the draft. How can you not call us ambitious while clearly being like either the worst or the second worst team in just a stacked West? Utah are the ultimate. Like, if they were in the East, they'd be so fun and feisty.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
they've got very, very tall mountain to climb, and they can sort of tank without tanking, I guess,
That's
if
for
that's
sure.
the approach that Austin wants to take. Just on Lauri, just sort of closing it out, and this is the same thing with Trey before we get on to our primary ball handlers. One of the things that I've noticed in the finals, particularly with Indiana, is how undefendable it is to have pick and roll ball partners for your primary initiator. So in Indiana's case, Tyrese Halliburton, that are just as much of a threat to roll than pop.
Yeah.
If you look at
Yeah.
Miles Turner, if you look at Pascal, if you look at Obi Toppin, each time an action is defended, there is a 50-50 chance that these guys are going to pop to 25, 27 feet, or they're going to run like hell to the rim to sort of be found by that guy to dime them up. And I think that both Lauri and Trey
Mm-hmm.
can really fulfill that very modern archetype of being, you know how Chuck says switchblade guards?
Yeah.
It's almost like a switchblade pick and roll partner where you're a wing, you're not necessarily like 7'2" Rudy Gobert rolling to the rim, but you can be effective going either way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And like to your point about the Raptors keeping that 9th pick, I think it's important to be able to go double big in certain scenarios. And
Mm-hmm.
Lowry is so malleable in the sense that he can play with another big man. And yeah, I mean, absolutely to the point of being versatile offensively. And I think the one thing with Lowry that kind of gets undersold or whatever you want to call it,
Sure.
is the cutting off of the ball. I thought he was
Mm.
so excellent in Will Hardy's system that kind of asks you to move without the ball a lot. And the way that he utilizes them is very similar to what Darko Rajakovic does with his big. So like getting them to crash from the corners, a cut from the corners in certain situations to get them moving without the ball. That's intriguing to me when it comes to Lowry. Using like big to big pick and rolls with
Mm-hmm.
Lowry and another big would be intriguing. I know they do it with Walker Kessler in certain moments. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and you speak about the idea of like, oh, you know, maybe Brandon and Scotty interacting in pick and roll might not be the strongest because they're going to be defended by similarly sized players. You run like a Spain pick and roll with 3 guys that are over 6'7", 6'8".
Tough. Yeah.
The other team is going to run out of size eventually. Someone is going to have a
Yeah.
mismatch somewhere to pursue. So that could be pretty fun. But that sort of brings our like elite spacing wings chat to a close. And we're going to close out this podcast by talking about primary ball handlers. And I think before we get into a name, just tell me how big a season Emmanuel quickly needs to have for the Toronto Raptors next year.
Huge, absolutely massive. I do want to kind of mention he was very injured this year
Yeah.
and did not get off to a good start. And whether it was the bone bruise in his butt or the elbow injury that kind of hurt him for the majority of the season, he never got into a rhythm. And so I think that kind of stagnated everything he wanted to do in the second half of the season. And by the time they got to the second half of the season, they were in tanking mode. So he was resting every other game. And I don't think it was the start he wanted for what his career would be in Toronto in his first full season. And I think there's a world in which he can be much better if there's better talent on this team that doesn't require him to be the primary ball handler. And that's why I think the Brandon Ingram acquisition is massive because it alleviates some of that usage from Quickly. He can be more of an off-ball player. He can be more of a guy who's moving without the ball and kind of springing into open spaces where BI's gravity getting downhill or BI's gravity in the mid-range area can create shots for him. Similar to Trey Murphy, but maybe 5 inches shorter in the sense that he can kind of spring and move around everywhere.
Yeah, of course.
And the same thing applies to Scotty Barnes. I just think Brandon makes Scotty's life so much easier because Scotty can work off of the ball as a guy in that dunker spot. He's so good at catching and finishing that it just makes life easier for him without having to create every single shot that he does. So I think Quickly will have a better season if he stays healthy, just because there's added talent on the team. And if any of these acquisitions happen, whether it's the Giannis's of the world or if it's someone secondary and it doesn't involve Quickly being traded, I think that will just benefit him even more because he'll be able to be in a more ancillary role offensively. And it'll just make him more well-rounded, to be honest with you.
It feels to me like when someone writes the second book of basketball and they're chronicling like this era of the NBA, they'll look back at the late 2010s and the early 2020s as the Helio era, where that's what teams were really pursuing. How much usage can we get out of one guy?
Yeah.
And it feels to me like that
It's
chapter is somewhat
completely
shutting.
Oh,
It's flipped, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe it changes back when we have expansion and you don't quite have the luxury of all this talent sort of stuffed into 30 teams and you do see these like one-man bands really come back to fruition. But it really pays to have an Emmanuel Quickly next to an Ingram, next to a Scotty. It's just how cohesive can you make that unit? Because unless you are the second best player in the NBA, you really need to be able to interact with your teammates. There's nothing really. It's like in football, the thing that you get told by your coach at a really, really early age is the ball will always move faster than you. It doesn't matter if you can beat 4 or 5 players.
They say that in basketball too. They say that in
there
basketball.
you go.
Yeah. Yep.
It's crossed the pond. It's gone either way. Who knows where it's originated? But the ball will always move quicker than you as a player. So the more you get it moving, the more you get it fizzing around, the more indecision you can create, the more room there is for a mistake to be made. So hopefully IQ can sort of really come to shine. Before we start on these guys, defensively, do you think if he's in a more ancillary role on offense where he's still like a really valuable member of the team, sort of like Nemhardy for the Pacers, do you think we see the defense pick back up because he's had one hell of an offensive load since he's got to Toronto?
Yeah, I think off ball, yes. And that's what we saw in New York too. He was more of a spring into action off ball guy. On ball, I just don't see that ever becoming a strength of his. He might get to the point where he's a net neutral and he might not get picked on consistently, but I don't see it being one of those things that he can hang his hat on. And yeah, to that point, I think off ball is like maybe because he's actually a pretty long player for his size. I think he has like a 6'7", 6'9" wingspan. He can get into passing lanes quickly because of that length, but on ball, his strength is not there, or his ability, his just sheer size isn't there either. So, we talk about depth in the finals and depth in the playoffs. Another thing that's prevailing, and shout out to, I believe his name is Owen Phillips, who writes about this, but F5, right? The concept of the weakest link. And I think in terms of targeting poor defenders, that's becoming a prevailing thing in these playoffs too. Not to say it happened to Darius Garland, but Garland is one of those guys that conceptually people talk about with the Cavs as a guy you can poke at. With the Knicks, it was Jalen Brunson and what happened there. And like you need to be able to have guys who can guard all throughout. And so if you have a guy who is high usage and high minutes but can't guard, it could be an issue in the playoffs. Yeah.
And teams have got so much better at doing it in the last 5 years. It used to sort of be LeBron saying, "Bring me my lunch" on the perimeter, and he'd ISO against someone. Yeah, exactly. Bring him to me. And Luka has done this for years and years and been an absolute playoff killer. But it feels like more and more the manipulation is to get the shortest guys, sort of the help defender, the weak side defender. And there's just layers and layers of really not being able to hide anymore. It's like, oh, yeah, fine. Go guard the guy in the corner. He's going to crash and he's going to grab the offensive rebound, or he's going to dunk all over you because he doesn't just have to stay out there anymore. So it's an interesting one. And I think it kind of means that for any of these primary ball handler trades, you sort of have to talk about Quickly being in the package, because in Darius Garland, in LaMelo Ball, and in Trae Young, you're not talking about anyone that can take on the primary matchup on the defensive end, sort of at the guard spot. So, which of those three names excites you most, S?
Man, shout out to Samson. I just kind of scheduled his video because he has a video coming out about like 5 trade targets, and his number 1 trade target for the Raptors is Darius Garland. I could not agree more. I think Garland would just, like, the way that he is able to jitter through defenders, the way that he uses his ball handling to create opportunities, to get downhill, to create shots with his pull-up shooting, the floater, all of that. He's really like a 3-level scorer in that sense. And I think that would be perfect to pair with Scotty Barnes in the pick and roll. Think about dribble handoffs with him and Garland, even with BI. Like, that's a match made in heaven offensively. And again, the Raptors have so desperately required a player who can do that for them. They had dreams and aspirations of quickly becoming that player for them. I don't know if that's necessarily him. I think the ball handling is nowhere near where Darius Garland is at. I think the creativeness in terms of the pull-up shooting and shot creation ability is nowhere near what Darius Garland is. And that's all respect to Quickly. I think he's much more of an off-ball catch and shoot type of player who can work kind of secondary to your stars, but Garland can be one of your stars. Now, we just had this conversation about weakest links, and I think that's a valid point to make. I actually probably think you can make it about all of these guys that we just mentioned.
Definitely.
But I like Garland the most because I'm in love with the fit and what he kind of brings to this team from all angles offensively. And I think he would be a great pickup. It's just, what's the trade? What would you give up? What would the Cavs be interested in? That becomes a very intriguing question,
He has the proven track record of being able to blend with other star talent and bring his sort of offensive juice to really, really high quality lineups. Whereas the other two guys feel like, if the game doesn't pivot in a certain way, and I'm not saying that it isn't already or it won't, they might be sort of remnants of the Helio era that we just sort of discussed briefly, where it's, oh, you're putting up 35% usage. That's not what we want to see these days. Whereas Garland has been able to function next to Mitchell, next to Mobley this year, and still really sort of juice those lineups. Obviously, when you have multiple creators, you can provide a real floor for your bench units in terms of the amount of creation that you get. And he's like this lovely halfway house between, the being able to bring all that on-ball juice, but also being so productive off-ball as a shooter and a spacer.
I love him. I honestly love him. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the league. So, like, I would be absolutely overjoyed at covering him for the Raptors. Again, it comes down to price and what the Cavs would be interested in. Like, would it be quickly 9 plus another pick or 2? I don't know. I'm not really sure. What do you think the deal would be?
What if we did trades kind of like Storage Wars, where the bidding goes up and all 30 teams are stood there, and you're going to bid for the Toronto Raptors, and I'm here and I'm like, okay, it's quickly in 3 first, going once, going twice. Are you going to get it?
Give me quickly in 2 first. Come on, give me quickly in 2 first.
Okay, quickly in 2, you'll get in on, right?
Yeah. Sold.
But then suddenly, San Antonio says, well, we don't really like the De'Aaron Fox fit. We're going to go in and we're just above that. And then they look back at you and they go, you can have him. We'll close the deal right now. It's quickly in 3 first. It's quickly in 3 first.
Count me in quickly in 3 first. Yes.
Yeah. There we go. I'm not going to bring you to 4. I think 4 would be incredibly rude as a guest of this podcast and as a member of the Raptors.
I honestly would imagine there could be an argument from the Cavs perspective to get 4, to be honest with you. I mean, we just saw Desmond Bane, and now I'm kind of like,
this always happens. The brain-breaking trade of like, what the hell is the price anymore?
Right. We have to consider the fact that, like, KCP was a salary dump, and so 1 or maybe 1.5 of those picks was because they were dumping KCP salary. You could also argue that maybe this would be a Quickly sort of situation too, depending on what people's value is of Emmanuel Quickly. They could think of it as a salary dump too. I'm not sure, but
I do think with Quickly, there's more sort of like playoff not that KCP wasn't like a playoff proven guy, but there is more just player value.
And there's younger. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, that contract's only going to get better, being sort of a flat rate as well. It's going to age a little bit now.
Right.
Okay, so we're really high on Darius. Storage Wars is coming in. I'm going to pitch this to Adam Silver in Las Vegas. I'm going to go, this is how you should do all trades. Cut out Shams. Let's just get everyone in a room and
That
sort of
would be awesome.
Could you imagine?
Well,
Just
yeah,
one day of auctioning these guys off. It feels very
it does feel weird. I was gonna say it does have an icky
yeah.
feeling to it, but
We'll dress it up in a different way. We'll
right.
dress it up in a different way. But
Yeah,
that would be, peak drama. I feel like that would easily be the most watched NBA event of the year all the time, which is kind of the sad state that the sport is in sometimes with
fair enough. Yeah.
the trade coverage. That being said, we're doing an episode on Big Fish, and we're going to talk about this would be my guy. This would be the
Cool.
championship ceiling guy. It's also the guy that could sort of ruin your franchise and make you have to trade Scotty Barnes in a couple of years. LaMelo is the guy that I would be going for. And I spoke to Trey about this maybe a year and a bit ago, and we
He
both just
loves
geeked
LaMelo.
out.
Yeah.
We were just like, LaMelo and Scotty, sign me up, man.
First of all, hey, I will say Trey loves LaMelo. There's no one that I know on the Raptors side of things that watches the Hornets more than Trey. So he's locked in. He's locked into Brandon Miller. He's very excited for VJ Edgecombe to hopefully be on that team. But yeah, LaMelo would probably be my second pick here, just because I think with his size, you can get away with certain things defensively that you can't necessarily hide him, but you can make it so that his length could be useful to you on the defensive end. And yes, he's going to get picked on. Yes, there are going to be moments where stronger dudes or faster dudes or more athletic dudes will take advantage of him on the defensive end. But I think there's a world where you can hide him given the right defensive infrastructure. And with Scotty, with Jakob, maybe with BI in the fold, you can do that. Now, what in the world is the trade? It would probably be I don't know, 5 picks, 6
I
picks.
don't know. I think this feels cheaper.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and it's just
Is it
because of the injury
Okay.
concern.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
And there's also this sort of nice moment where you can look at Charlotte and you can make out of this really fine. There's not going to be any sort of issue with your team if you go, hey, we're adding the number 4 and the number 9 pick to our team.
Right.
We're pivoting to Brandon Miller. We've got all this salary cap space that we can use on someone else. Quickly is a really fun guard to have next to a Brandon Miller and whoever you want to bring in at 4 as well, whether that be Ace or VJ. And then you give up another, maybe 1 to 2 picks. So I suppose it's the same price as what we discussed for Garland.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a 5-pick thing. I don't think there's as much interest league-wide in LaMelo as there is Garland if they were supposed to hit the open market.
You know what? That's probably fair just because I think the idea of LaMelo is much, much better than the version that we've seen in the sense that he has been injured and some of the I've heard Zach Lowe call it circus basketball in the sense that he just tries certain things. I love him. I think he's incredible. He's wildly intuitive. That makes a lot of sense with Scotty. You have to just put him in the right environment to be hey, we're trying to win basketball games now. You think you could kind of not do the floater 3 5 times a game, let's lock in here. That to me is the next step for LaMelo. It's going from a guy who's what was his usage last year? It was something
I've got it.
It was absurd. It was an absurd number.
A league-leading 35.9% usage for the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, and I believe him and Miller still led the league in 3-point attempts at some point in the season. They led the league. Yeah.
So not only did they lead the league for 3-point attempts, but as a duo, they registered the highest amount of 3-point attempts per game of any duo in league history.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So they just pushed it to the absolute nth degree. And considering the fact that Brandon Miller played I think it was 22 games last year. I'm sorry, who was he meant to be passing the ball to? At least when he came into this Charlotte Hornets team, it was you can give it to Terry Rozier, you can give it to Gordon Hayward. You can run handoff action through Mason Plumlee. I feel you look at the Charlotte Hornets roster. I understand, particularly with an analytics inclined coach in Charles Lee, the highest ceiling of our team is telling LaMelo to absolutely run the show night after night. And if it's putting on a show with 5 floater threes, you kind of just have to let him do it. Even Trey Mann went down, and they were fun when they had.
He was a lot of fun.
LaMelo on the court. Yeah. So I don't know. I'll have this conversation with Trey, and we'll figure out who is actually higher on LaMelo. But
I would be down.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the intrigue. I like the excitement when it comes to LaMelo. I'm ultimately sort of curious if he would even be available in the summer, you know? Like, I think this honestly, you would probably everybody except Trey. I think there's the most likely candidate out of all these players that we've talked about. Trey, because of his extension situation.
Yeah.
There's more of an opportunity for him to be available versus Garland, versus Ja, versus LaMelo. How do you feel about that?
I'm really sorry. I just saw LaMelo's middle name. Have you got any idea what LaMelo's middle name is?
I
This
feel
is
like I know this. I feel like I know
incredible.
this.
Think Europe.
Think Europe?
Think Europe.
Like countries?
Like countries. Yeah.
LaMelo,
Think
Lithuania.
Montreal.
Oh, Montreal. LaMelo, French, Paris. LaMelo,
His
Paris.
name is LaMelo La France Ball.
France.
La France Ball. The
That's awesome.
advertising, the merchandising would go insane if you get LaMelo La France Ball. Montreal would immediately need a franchise. You get like a second stadium opening up there.
Yeah.
That's just
You would
brilliant.
definitely sell tickets. There's no question about that. Yeah.
I love the idea as well. Like he could really feasibly be the smallest player on your court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. That's nuts. Yeah.
So let's get to a truly small player on the court. Let's close this conversation with the guy that you said you think is most available. And again,
Mm-hmm.
we're not aggregating anything. It's just speculation based off those sort of like extension talks. And
Yep.
it seems like maybe we would have heard something if it was all set in stone by now. Trey's game has evolved over the last couple of years. It's fair to say, and it looks a little bit more darko than it did a couple of years ago. Does
Mm-hmm.
it look darko enough for you to be interested, S?
Yes, and maybe no. And I think at this point, when you inquire a player like Trey, you do have to, it's the sort of thing. It's like coach the team you have versus coach the team you want. And
Yes.
Darko would probably need to do that a little bit if they did acquire Trey Young. I think it would make sense because to me, again, the pick and roll partner with him and Scotty Barnes or him and Brandon Ingram would make a lot of sense. I do think Trey is one of the most underrated playmakers in the NBA in terms of what he can do with the basketball. He is a bit of a streaky shooter, he kind of goes through these moments where he'll shoot like 30% from three, and then he'll have moments where he shoots like 45% from three, and you're like, which player am I getting here?
Who we getting? Yeah.
Yeah, but for the most part, I think that makes sense. And like trying is part of the battle when it comes to a player that undersized defensively, and I will credit him for trying.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason he has been able to try more is because there's a better defensive infrastructure in Atlanta too, between Dyson Daniels and Reese Shea and Jalen Johnson when he was healthy, and Okongwu is a good defender, and Clint Capella, despite being a little bit washed, like is still a decent defender.
Yep.
They had good length around him, and if you think about the Raptors, they also have a requisite level of length. I think a player like Scotty Barnes can clean up for a lot of the things that Trey can't do defensively. I think the front court of Scotty Barnes and Jakob Poeltl at their peaks could be a very good defense, even in spite of Trey Young. So yeah, I would be in on this. Again, to me, it's like, what is the conversation? What is the trade? I saw Zach Lowe suggest a Trey Young for Domantas Sabonis swap, and I nearly threw up in my mouth because it's just like, what are we talking about? All respect to Zach Lowe, but that's just like a wild trade from both perspectives. It's like the Kings. The Kings need a point guard, and they want to trade the guy that they need to pair with the point guard to get a point guard, and then the Hawks. What are the Hawks doing to? I don't get that trade. But that being said, if it's that type of trade that would get it done, sign me up. Count me in. I'd be down. Why not?
And this is one where you put the feelers out to Trey's representation, and you have to start the conversation with, we will give you a 4-year max. You sign here, we'll give you a 4-year max. And I think that's the contention at the moment for the Hawks, because they've got a lot of talent on the roster. We don't know what the Dyson extension is going to look like. We know that Jalen Johnson is sort of signed to a steal of a contract, but they might be trying to haggle him down, $5 million AAV a year, basically.
Yeah.
And you just say, I can't believe they're mistreating you like that. All you've done for that franchise, getting them to an Eastern Conference Finals, we'd max you tomorrow if we had you. And then you just leave it for a week. And then you say, if you were to want to trade, where would we be exactly on your
Yeah.
list? Would you be willing to say to Chris Haynes, say to Shams, say to whoever your favorite leaker is? I only really want to go to Toronto. How many teams are there around the league that would take the chance on giving him that 4-year max? I think
I don't
that's
know.
where the
That's a
conversation gets interesting.
Yeah, like maybe Brooklyn would, because Brooklyn doesn't necessarily have that like blue chip guy to build around. That's probably one player. Maybe Utah would, because they don't have that
Yeah.
blue chip player and they have 400,000 guards on their roster right now. Those are the only two teams that I think would consider being like, hey, we'll get involved in the Trae Young sweepstakes. But I think Toronto should be one of those teams as well. I think, based on our conversation over the last hour,
Mm.
the archetypes that you mentioned are the archetypes that make sense. It's the big shooting wing that can do a little bit of everything off of the ball and maybe create for you on the ball. And then
Mhm.
it's the lead ball handler, maybe high usage guy who can create for you off the bounce and pair well with the rest of your stars. Like those are the two guys that I think the Raptors should be targeting, even though they're now involved in, potential KD trades or Giannis trades. Those are so a little bit more pipe dreamy compared to,
Yep.
all right, let's go out and get guys who might be able to facilitate this roster the way that we're trying to build it already.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's like, if you can only do the one, it sort of comes down to your preference on what's most important. It comes down to your belief in Emmanuel quickly, and then probably your belief in Grady Dick as well. Like, as that sort of spacer, can he be the guy that fills that really high volume shooting threat on the roster? So I think it's a really interesting one to watch. It's really nice that every name we've discussed, we've sort of been like, yeah, I'd take him. I'd take him. There's a price,
dude,
but it's
listen,
like, just
look,
give me an all NBA player. It's
look,
fine.
you can't really, like, you've won 30 games. What do you
Yeah.
really have to lose here by involving yourself in these conversations? I understand that the Raptors are going to be a better team than the 30 wins
Mhm.
that they had last year, but yeah, absolutely get yourself involved,
Interestingly enough, with your Domas comment, I was close to messaging you last night. Like, should we add Sabonis onto this?
I'm
Like,
done.
mega Pirtle, mega
No,
Pirtle.
yeah,
No, we've
no.
identified the archetype. We're clear. We're positive.
Although,
Oh, the finger touch. Yeah.
although I will say,
Although,
if there is one player that Domantas Sabonis has never played with that could actually make it feasible for him to play the 5, it's
yes.
Scotty Barnes, because he needs that type of defensive guy, that like Aaron
Mhm.
Gordon-y type defender who can be your backline help and weak side help in certain situations. And Scotty is exactly that. And so you
Mhm.
could talk me into it, but I would not like it. I wouldn't be happy with it,
That's the episode of Storage Wars where they get to the locker and it's like, someone start the bidding. So, just someone jump in.
And
Come on.
everybody's just looking at each other like,
Throw
yeah,
me Jakob
yeah.
and cap space relief. Let's just let's get the ball rolling here. But yeah,
Hey,
I
if they
think
want to
it's a
include
really
Malik
interesting one.
Monk, count me in. I'm down.
There you
That's
go.
the swing factor. I'm down. Lock
You
it in.
need a Rob Pelinka, Nico Harrison. Like, yeah, we'd maybe think about it if you put Keon Ellis in there.
Let's sit for coffee. Let's sit for coffee at ABC Coffee or whatever it was. Yeah.
Nice. I think that's a good idea. Well, look, whether the big star trade happens this trade deadline, this off season, at the trade deadline, in the next one, I feel a lot more positive about the Raptors this year than I did last year. I was a
Yeah.
little confused last year, but we've had some draft luck. We have another, in my opinion, star in the building in Brandon. I know that not everyone's going to agree with that. And we've got a little bit of a runway. And this team finally looks settled, which is nice. They've been in a constant state of flux for the last
I
18
mean, I don't
months.
know if they're settled anymore, man. They keep
Yeah.
involving themselves in these conversations, and I maybe that is just the life of a Toronto Raptor, in the sense that you're always going to be involved in these conversations. But it does seem like they're going to do something, just because
Yes.
they are expensive for a team that is like trying to get to the playoffs next year. So we'll see what happens with RJ Barrett and maybe Emmanuel Quickly, or maybe Jakob Pertl, who's extension eligible. Oh, Chaya Baji. But yeah, like they're going to do something here in the next little bit. Yeah.
I really don't want to end on this dour note, but were we not having this conversation 2 years ago, where it's like, oh, they're a bit expensive for where they want to be. Like, oh, you're going to have to trade the core. Hopefully it doesn't turn into that. I think it's going to be a little bit more optimistic than that this year.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, sir.
Tell everyone what you've got planned. I feel like, we're at an hour recording time. If you want to hear all of what S has got planned, settle in for the next 10 minutes because this guy never stops.
No, nothing big, man.
Come on.
You can listen to me on the NBA Daily over at The Athletic. It's myself, David Dufour, and Zena Keita. It's daily. It's in the name. I do some video work for them as well, doing breakdowns and whatnot for The Athletic. Some social stuff for Bleacher Report, some writing and videos for Raptors Republic covering the Toronto Raptors. And that's all I got. See, not that big. Couple minutes, couple seconds.
You could have filibustered for a long time though, man. S is one of the busiest people in the space, but he also puts out such high quality content. He deserves all that he's got this season in terms of like the opportunities. And I'm just so happy for you, man, that you're out there smashing it, putting the great coverage into the world. Because I don't know, do you watch Solitaire during finals games?
You know what? I don't, but I'm thinking of downloading it for tonight's game, just to throw it on there.
Just chuck it in. A little bit of Angry Birds here and there, a little bit of Candy Crush. We'll see. No, exactly. You've got a real like hoops junkie here, so make sure you're checking out S and all the links down below. And thank you so much for coming on. Guys, enjoy what could be the last game of the NBA Finals by the time this podcast goes out.
Yes, sir.
You will know. We don't. We're here sort of blissfully unaware, waiting for the action to unfold, but also enjoy tracking the Toronto Raptors off-season. There's no better place to do it than by following Raptors Republic, by following S and all the guys over there. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Keep it locked on the Drop Step. We will see you all next time.